Hi, I'm Jennifer Trotu, and I'm the Director of Collections and Interpretation here at the Gamble House in Pasadena. Today, I'd like to talk to you about this magnificent front door that's one of the most significant elements of the house and greets you just as you walk up the front steps. This door is one of the most outstanding art glass features of Green & Green's work, and certainly of this house. So I think a lot of people don't appreciate it as much when they first walk up to it and they want to see art glass with light passing through it. But when we walk up to the front of it, especially on a bright morning like this, all the textures in the glass are the things that really stands out to us. So this door was designed by Charles Green, one of the architects of the house, and he wanted to make a statement that would really fill one side of the entrance hall and also fill your field of vision as you approach the house. You can see that it spreads really broadly across the front and emphasizes that horizontal line of the house, and also starts to introduce the theme of nature that becomes such an important part of the house itself and its setting in the garden. So we can see here, even from the exterior, this spreading tree that's going to be the focus of the entry hall. And we can see how this teak framework that it's set within really starts to bring out the richness of the color. You get the contrast between the greens in the door and the red tones in the teak. And so that exciting color contrast starts to set the tone for what you're going to see inside. Let's go ahead and take a look at the door from the interior of the house. I like to think of this door as really this significant work of art that you pass just as soon as you come in the front door. And when you're close to the door and you're passing through, you can start to see all the details here that went into the fabrication of the window. So, for example, they're trying to communicate the idea of a tree in a medium like glass. And a tree is probably the least glass-like thing that you can think of. But the way they've done that is to really incorporate the leading into the design of the window itself. And this is something that Green & Green were particularly noted for. So you can see that when they adhered all of these different pieces together, the way they did that was with a technique called copper foil. So they would take two pieces of glass and layer them together, which is called plating. And then around the edges of that small piece of glass, they would use a copper tape. And then it's actually the copper that the lead adheres to once the pieces are all set together. So the lead is applied in a molten state, and they can push it into these different textures and things once it starts to cool. So that's what you're seeing here that gives this bark-like texture. In this area down here, we're looking at something that's supposed to look like pine needles, and that has a smoother texture around it to distinguish it from the bark that's adjacent to it. You can also start to see, with the light shining off of the glass, all the complexity of the layers in here. So these, again, this is two pieces of glass that are layered together. And that depth that you get from that effect is what is so striking here. So you start to see a lot of different color effects. You start to see, something that kind of suggests the idea of a sky far beyond the tree itself, and really gives you kind of a very rich experience of this medium of art glass just as you're standing right in front of it. So let's take a look at the door from inside the house. So you can see that it spreads across 6 panels of the door, reaching all the way up into the corners here. You can also see that that suggestion of the shape of a tree, that kind of roundedness of the upper corners, is generated by the fact that the staircase cuts the edge up here. So that shape of the stairs, that upper run of the stairs, is what informs the other side here to make this whole piece symmetrical. And then breaking down that symmetricality, you've got this wild spreading tree that goes across the entire assembly. So one of the things that we think of when we look at this is certainly the way that a pine tree is depicted in Japanese art. And we're not sure exactly which tree this is because there was no documentation of it. But over time, enough people have looked at it, it's sort of been decided that it's probably a Japanese black pine. So that was determined by the shape of the tree and the way that these kind of scales of bark are depicted. And then you can see that the way that the pine needles are shown in these little clouds is reminiscent of the way that a Japanese artist would have depicted pine needles. So that idea that you would take the inspiration from something like a Japanese screen with its gold background and its spreading tree across multiple panels is really what we're looking at here. The glass that was used in the door is from Kokomo, Indiana, and it was a particular glassmaker that was popular for this type of art glass in the period. So the pieces actually, the sheets of glass would actually come from Indiana and then be sort of cut and matched and placed here in Southern California. That's where the piece was actually assembled, was actually fabricated. So we have photographs of the Sturdy Lang Studios, and so we can kind of see how they worked. And in those photos, you can actually see examples of Green and Green windows that are in the background. But you know, that kind of close relationship that the designer has with the artist is so important throughout the Gamble House, and we see it particularly here in the glass. There's a certain kind of pushing that has to happen between the artist and the designer of the piece, because they're trying to express something that the fabricator or the glass artist actually knows how to express. So in order to really make something like this happen, you really need that kind of design, that design outlook, and you also need that in-depth knowledge of the materials. So over time, as Green and Green worked on more of these art glass windows, they had more of that facility themselves to be able to understand how to get particular effects that they wanted through the medium of art glass, by sort of remembering their work on previous pieces with the artist, and by kind of trying to push the boundaries of the medium a little bit with their participation. The tree that's depicted in the front door acts as a transition in a number of ways. For one thing, you're coming from the outdoors, which is where trees actually are, into the interior. And then as soon as you open that door and you walk into this space and close the door behind you, there's a real sense of calm and quiet that comes over you. So when you look back out to the street that you came from, instead of seeing the street going by and all the activity out there, instead you're seeing this depiction of this tree that kind of dominates this space. So you're immediately brought to thoughts of kind of calmness and nature and all the things that kind of brings to sort of soothe you once you come into the house. So the fact that you're surrounded by wood, you're looking back at this tree, and then down the other end of the hall, the thing that you immediately find your eye drawn toward is a view of the garden. So that idea that the front door and the big glass doors to the rear garden would be on axis with each other is a very important element of a Green and Green entrance hall. But that idea of being enveloped by the materials and by the details around you is what people really feel when they come in here. There's that kind of immediate sense of the darkness compared to outside, and that shelter from the sun that's so important in these houses. That was why Green and Green made these houses so dark. The landscape was very bright and very harsh. And now we've got lots of big trees around Pasadena, but 110 years ago, this was a pretty blank landscape in terms of the tree growth that people from the Midwest would have been used to. So that idea that you need some kind of shelter from architecture and that your home is a shelter, all those things kind of play in together here. And usually when people come in the entrance hall, that's the first thing they feel. Thanks for joining us today for this in-depth look at the front door of the Gamble House, which was such an important portal to everything that the Gamble family and their guests would discover every time they passed through the door. Please join us for other features about the Gamble House, where there's so much to explore and to learn.